The story of my dramatic clash with the Homeowners Association, HOA, began long before their car found its unintended resting place on my farm. Living in a rural area, I always cherished the independence that came with my land, a sprawling expanse that had been in my family for generations. This piece of earth wasn't just a farm. It was a sanctuary where I cultivated crops, raised livestock, and felt the freedom to live life on my terms. However, life took a sharp turn when the HOA, formed by nearby homeowners seeking community standards and property upkeep, tried to impose regulations that clashed with my lifestyle. Initially, interactions with the HOA were limited and relatively cordial. They had reached out about maintaining certain aesthetics on the perimeter of the neighborhood, things like landscaping and paint colors for homes. I understood the desire for uniformity but believed they were overstepping when they began dictating aspects that should be left to individual homeowners. Their suggestions quickly morphed into demands, leading to numerous disputes over what could only be described as perceived slights against their vision for the community. Tensions escalated notably during a recent incident involving parking regulations. One afternoon, I noticed a group from the HOA congregating at a neighbor's house for a meeting. While this didn't concern me at first, I learned later that they had decided amongst themselves that unapproved parking around the neighborhood would now come under stricter scrutiny. This decision echoed through our small community like an unwelcome storm cloud. It soon became apparent that they would not respect my property line despite it being clearly defined. The straw that broke the camel's back happened one weekend when I returned home from running errands only to find an unfamiliar vehicle parked haphazardly on my field. The boldness of their action was infuriating. It wasn't just any car but one belonging to an HOA member involved in those very discussions about parking. Someone who had stood against me in meetings advocating stricter rules. That blatant disregard for my property ignited feelings of frustration and betrayal within me. In that moment, I decided it was time to send a message that would reverberate not just through our neighborhood but also through every entity daring to infringe upon my rights as a landowner. What followed was a series of impulsive thoughts fueled by indignation. Maybe burying their car would finally drive home the point about personal boundaries and respect for private property. Thus began my descent into conflict, setting off events that would change everything between us and transform how I approach challenges posed by the HOA in future encounters. It was an ordinary Saturday when the unsettling incident struck, setting off a chain reaction that I never could have anticipated. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over my fields as I glanced out from the barn, where I was tending to some tools. Everything felt serene, yet a storm brewing in the depths of my frustration with the HOA lingered like a dark cloud overhead. As I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag, something caught my eye. There it was, an unfamiliar vehicle parked squarely in the middle of my best pasture. My heart sank as I recognized it immediately. It was a car belonging to one of the very HOA members with whom I had clashed in those meetings about parking and property rules. It stood out like a sore thumb against the green backdrop of my land, as if it didn't belong there, and it didn't. Rushing over with disbelief fueling my steps, I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. The brazen audacity to park unannounced on my property was infuriating. My once tranquil sanctuary now felt violated, and with each stride towards that car, a whirlwind of emotions threatened to consume me. Anger, betrayal, and disbelief collided in an overwhelming surge. I had always taken pride in maintaining the boundaries of my land. Seeing one of their cars so carelessly intruding upon it crossed a line I never thought they would dare to touch. As I approached the vehicle, I tried to steady my thoughts. Maybe it was a mistake? Perhaps they thought it was acceptable given their newfound parking rules? Those hopeful explanations quickly dissipated as I spotted the unmistakable HOA sticker on the windshield. Their emblem loomed larger than life like a branding on something that should never have been marked. In that moment, a sense of powerlessness washed over me, followed by a rush of indignation. Who did they think they were? The uninvited guests didn't even have the courtesy to ask or inform me beforehand. Their entitlement felt suffocating. What if someone had driven up onto my crops or disrupted my livestock? They just assumed their community standards granted them rights over my land, which absolutely did not extend to me at all. I stood beside the car, fists clenched by my sides as fury coursed through me. a cocktail of frustration mixed with memories of their countless intrusions into my autonomy. The demands about landscaping and appearances now seemed trivial compared to this blatant disregard for personal property. My entire sense of control seemed to slip through my fingers like sand. For hours after this confrontation, I could hardly focus on the chores that awaited me around the farm. Instead, I kept glancing toward that car, stewing in an emotional state of betrayal and pondering how I could balance respect for community with defending what was rightfully mine. A battle far more complicated than I ever imagined. The tensions with the HOA didn't emerge overnight. They were the result of a series of frustrating encounters that built up over time. Initially, I had hoped for a collaborative relationship, one where we could coexist while respecting each other's boundaries. In the early days, meetings were held to discuss minor issues regarding landscaping and community aesthetics. I attended these gatherings with an open mind, believing my input would be valued. However, it quickly became apparent that my perspective was not welcomed. The first warning sign came when the HOA proposed a set of strict guidelines for lawn upkeep and property appearances. While I understood the desire for uniformity in a neighborhood, I took pride in my land's rustic charm and natural state. During one meeting, I voiced my concern about how their regulations might overshadow our individuality as homeowners. My comments were dismissed, brushed aside with polite nods but little real consideration. As time went on, the HOA's demands grew increasingly intrusive. They began sending out letters about perceived violations, most notably regarding my fences and the way I allowed certain wildflowers to bloom around my land. It felt like constant scrutiny. Every decision I made was met with criticism or complaints from neighbors who had allied themselves with the association. Instead of fostering camaraderie, the HOA seemed intent on creating divisions among residents. My frustration peaked when they organized a community drive to ensure everyone was adhering to their new parking policies. This initiative was framed as an effort to enhance safety and aesthetics, but it felt more like an invasion into our lives, a way for them to exert control over how we managed our properties. When I received a notice about parking regulations that explicitly stated where I could and couldn't have friends park during gatherings, it felt like they were reaching into areas of my life that should remain personal. These experiences bred resentment within me as I watched the HOA tighten its grip on our neighborhood. Their approach bordered on micromanagement. What began as gentle reminders morphed into demands for compliance that left little room for individual freedoms or personal expression. The growing animosity reached a boiling point during informal conversations at local events, where friends expressed their own frustrations about the HOA's overreach. It was clear that many shared my feelings, leading me to believe they were no longer serving our community but rather imposing their will upon it. The incident with their car parked on my farm was not just an isolated event. It represented everything the HOA had come to symbolize, a disregard for personal autonomy under the guise of maintaining order. Those prior interactions shaped my resolve and led me down a path toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation that loomed just around the corner. In the minutes following my discovery of the HOA member's car parked defiantly in my pasture, a storm of thoughts and emotions surged through me. Anger simmered just below the surface, making it difficult to breathe as I replayed the history of violations and disrespect that had culminated in this moment. The audacity was staggering. They had crossed a line, stepping onto my land without consent, a move born out of misjudgment or sheer arrogance. How could they think they had the right to dictate what happened on my property? As I paced back and forth near that car, wrestling with my mounting frustrations, a stray thought flickered into existence. What if I buried it? At first, it felt like a ridiculous idea, but the more I deliberated, the more compelling it became. This wasn't just about a car. It represented the overreach of authority I had endured for too long. Maybe I needed to take drastic action to assert my autonomy and provoke a reckoning. The vision coalesced in my mind. The loader sitting idle by my barn, its heavy frame gleaming under the sun as if waiting for an opportunity to spring into action. My heart raced at the prospect of commandeering that massive piece of machinery, something generally reserved for hauling hay or digging trenches. Burying their car would send an unmistakable message, not just to that homeowner but to the entire HOA, that I wouldn't be subjected to their whims any longer. In every single grievance we'd had with them, it became clearer how these intrusions eroded not just my property rights but also our quality of life. The moments spent contemplating whether or not friends could park on our land felt particularly insidious. They had become an unwelcome invasive presence lurking over our everyday decisions. The thought of burying that car was now intertwined with defiance. Yet alongside this excitement surged waves of doubt. What if there were legal ramifications? What if neighbors turned against me? But then those very thoughts seemed weak compared to the righteousness I felt for defending what belonged to me. The homeowners who formed alliances with the HOA should care about fairness. For too long, those turned against communal harmony were shielded while punishing those who dared stand up for themselves. Outside, I could hear nature's chorus undisturbed by HOA regulations. The rustling leaves and birdsong echoed what I truly valued: freedom. A watchful resolve settled as I visualized them digging deeper into indignation should they be unceremoniously reminded that their authority extended only as far as our community allowed. With every passing second, my decision crystallized. Motivated by both provocation and reclaiming control over my land, burying that car suddenly felt like an inevitable act, a turning point in reclaiming respect in a battle fraught with transgressions over autonomy and individuality. It was time to send a signal loud enough for everyone involved to hear. Once my decision was made, the logistics of executing my plan began to take shape in my mind. The first step was to prepare the loader, a hefty piece of machinery that had long been my reliable workhorse for various farm tasks. As I approached it, I felt a mix of adrenaline and unease. This was no ordinary task, and the weight of what I was about to do loomed heavily in my thoughts. I climbed into the cab, familiarizing myself with the controls as if they were old friends. Despite having used the loader countless times for legitimate purposes like moving hay bales and digging trenches for irrigation, this situation felt entirely different. I had to ensure that everything was in working order: the hydraulic systems, the bucket's lift capabilities, and the fuel levels. After a quick inspection and some minor adjustments, I was ready to put my plan into action. Next came the challenge of navigating through my fields to reach the car without causing too much disruption. The ground had dried out nicely after a recent rain, but I still needed to tread carefully to avoid damaging any crops or creating ruts in the soil. With determination propelling me forward, I maneuvered the loader through rows of corn and soybeans, feeling both exhilarated and apprehensive with every turn. Upon reaching the car, I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts. It sat there innocently enough, but now represented an affront that needed addressing. My heart raced as I positioned the loader's bucket over the vehicle, carefully judging how best to approach this task without causing unnecessary damage beyond what was intended. The sight of it nestled between two fence posts heightened my resolve. This act would serve as a reminder not just for them but also for me, a reclaiming of control in a landscape that had been encroached upon. As I began to dig into the earth beside the car, I encountered an unexpected complication: rocky soil that resisted my efforts. It slowed me down and tested my patience. This wasn't going as smoothly as I'd hoped. Each scoop revealed more stubborn stones than anticipated, forcing me to adjust my strategy on the fly while keeping an eye on the car. After several attempts, frustration simmered beneath the surface, but finally, I managed to create a sufficient trench beside it. With adrenaline coursing through me, I lifted the loader's bucket high above its roofline and prepared to drop dirt onto it. This act felt surreal. Even though I knew it was necessary for making a statement about boundaries being crossed, part of me couldn't help but wonder how far this would go. With each load of earth dumped over the car's hood and windshield, an exhilarating rush surged through me. A cathartic release of pent-up emotions unleashed against years of HOA frustrations. It felt liberating yet reckless at once. There was no turning back now. As dirt piled higher around it like a makeshift tombstone marking an end to their overreach on my land, I couldn't shake off an impending sense of consequence looming nearby. What would happen next? As the last shovel of dirt settled onto the car's hood, a sense of immediacy gripped me. I had not only buried a vehicle but also, metaphorically, my frustrations and pent-up resentment towards the HOA. However, the repercussions began to unfold far sooner than I expected. Almost as soon as I hopped out of the loader, I could hear voices rising in excitement and confusion from my neighbors' properties. Initially, the reactions were mixed. While some neighbors looked on in disbelief and laughter at such a bold stance against their governing body, others appeared visibly concerned about what this might mean for community relations. A couple of them trotted over with wary expressions that can only be described as a blend of curiosity and apprehension. Had I instigated a war between myself and the HOA? Or was this an act of valor against an authority they resented too? They peppered me with questions, some even chuckling nervously at my audacious statement. Before too long, my phone began buzzing relentlessly. It was messages from friends and acquaintances asking if I had lost my mind, or if there was muddy truth to the rumors swirling through our small town. News travels fast when drama unfolds in tight-knit communities. The spectacle had ignited chatter everywhere. Even people who lived on the outskirts were curious about how far I had escalated tensions with the HOA. Not much later, it happened. The first domino fell into place at HOA headquarters. I received a formal letter claiming damages for interfering with an association member's property rights. Their tone was incredulous and authoritative as they attempted to cite violations against me for this unapproved action. The very idea that they believed they could dictate my actions after trespassing felt laughable, yet made my heart race as I grappled with impending consequences. In addition to their letter, whispers of legal implications loomed large. My initial exhilaration faded under their mounting threats. What if they pursued me in court? The prospect loomed over me like dark clouds promising rain after weeks of dry weather. Unsettling yet oddly familiar after facing their perpetual scrutiny. Then came the unanticipated visit from local law enforcement. A polite officer who parked his cruiser near my barn and approached cautiously, his demeanor calm but serious. As he queried about what had transpired that day, nervous tension festered between us. I desperately sought the right words to explain without inciting further complications. In those tense moments, surrounded by witnesses both friendly and unfriendly alike, clarity emerged in my resolve. Regardless of any immediate backlash from the HOA or public opinion, standing up for one's rights can bear risks, and perhaps even absurd methods yield power when silently subjugated under authority's thumb. As discussions faded into hushed tones among neighbors and discussions narrowed around me, creating ripples that might forever alter community dynamics, the question loomed larger than ever. Would this be a moment of principled awakening or simply another chapter marked by conflict unresolved? Only time would tell how deeply this decision would etch itself into our lives moving forward. The incident quickly became the talk of the town, igniting a firestorm of reactions that spanned the spectrum from outrage to support. Within hours, social media platforms were flooded with posts and opinions as locals weighed in on my bold decision. Some neighbors rallied behind me, celebrating what they viewed as a defiant stand against an overreaching HOA that had long stifled our sense of freedom. They applauded my audacity and even began sharing their own grievances about the association's incessant meddling, each story echoing similar frustrations. However, not everyone shared this perspective. A significant number of residents expressed concern about the potential fallout from my actions. They worried that my defiance might escalate into further conflict, fracturing community cohesion and inviting legal repercussions that could affect us all. The local coffee shop buzzed with debates, as regulars discussed whether burying the car was a justifiable act of protest or an irresponsible stunt that could result in long-term damage to community relations. As word spread beyond neighborhood gossip, local media outlets caught wind of the story. A reporter from the regional newspaper paid a visit to capture the unfolding drama, framing it as a clash between individual rights and community governance. The headline read something like, "Local farmer buries HOA car. A stand against authority or a reckless act?" My face appeared on TV screens and in newspapers as I attempted to articulate my motivations and feelings about the HOA's encroachments on my property rights. This platform felt both empowering and daunting. The last thing I wanted was to be misrepresented or cast as a villain for simply asserting what I believed was right. Interestingly, the coverage sparked conversations far beyond our quiet community. It resonated with homeowners across the region who felt trapped under similar circumstances where HOAs imposed rules that infringed upon personal freedoms. Letters and messages poured in from people who praised me for taking decisive action. Some even suggested forming a community meeting to discuss how we could collectively address HOA issues moving forward. Yet with recognition came scrutiny. the HOA itself launched a campaign to discredit my actions. They issued statements condemning my behavior as irresponsible and damaging to community standards, labeling me as a troublemaker who posed risks to our property values. This narrative drew a line in the sand. Those who supported me saw it as an affirmation of rights, while those aligned with the HOA viewed it as an affront to community order. Caught in this whirlwind of public opinion was both exhilarating and exhausting. I felt like an unwitting catalyst for change amid escalating tensions between individual autonomy and collective governance. While some heralded me as a hero, I knew there were consequences looming ahead. How would this affect not just my relationship with the HOA but also how neighbors perceived each other moving forward? As debates raged on, it became increasingly clear that I had unwittingly opened Pandora's box, with ramifications that would shape our community for years to come. The exhilaration of burying the HOA member's car quickly began to fade as the reality of potential legal consequences set in. Within just a few hours of the act, I received an unexpected visit from a local police officer who arrived at my farm with an air of professionalism that did little to ease the knot tightening in my stomach. He approached cautiously, clearly aware of the situation's delicacy. I felt a mix of anxiety and defiance. Here was the consequence I had anticipated but hoped wouldn't materialize. The officer explained that they had received a call from the HOA about destruction of property, a term that seemed to echo ominously in my ears. They were treating the incident with serious concern, and I was advised that I could face criminal charges depending on how the HOA decided to proceed. My heart raced as I tried to articulate that my actions were a protest against an ongoing violation of my rights, rather than an act of vandalism. But I could feel the weight of their language looming over me like an impending storm. In the days that followed, the HOA escalated their response, launching a formal complaint that outlined their grievances in detail. They cited several legal statutes regarding property damage, claiming that my actions not only inflicted harm on one of their members' vehicles but also disrupted community order and values. The letter outlined potential financial repercussions, including demands for compensation for damages incurred and legal fees associated with their pursuit of this matter. My head spun as I read through the legal jargon, each line feeling like a personal affront to my sense of justice. As rumors spread through the community, many neighbors urged me to seek legal counsel. Some voiced concerns that any ensuing court case could set a precedent affecting all properties governed by HOAs in the area. The thought of being in a courtroom, defending my actions before a judge, added an entirely new layer of anxiety to my already tumultuous situation. I was conflicted. Standing firm for what I believed was right meant potentially sacrificing my peace of mind and financial stability. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself grappling with questions about rights and responsibilities. Had I crossed a line that would undermine my position within the community? While it felt empowering to take action against perceived injustices, what would happen if those actions landed me in hot water legally? The impending possibility of court dates and legal battles loomed large on the horizon, overshadowing any triumphs I had felt after making my statement. With discussions swirling around me, both supportive and dissenting, I understood that my stand against the HOA had ignited conversations about property rights and governance that many had long simmered beneath the surface. I had inadvertently thrust myself into a larger narrative, one where homeowners grappled with authority, autonomy, and collective identity. As I prepared for what lay ahead, my resolve solidified. Regardless of how things unfolded legally, this fight represented much more than burying a car. It was about reclaiming dignity in a battle against perceived oppression. In that clarity, I found a renewed sense of purpose amid uncertainty. In the wake of my bold decision to bury the HOA member's car, a deeper reflection on property rights and HOA authority began to crystallize in my mind. The intensity of the confrontation highlighted a significant issue that many homeowners grapple with across the nation: the delicate balance between individual freedoms and collective governance imposed by homeowners associations. While HOAs are often created with the intent to maintain community standards and enhance property values, they can also transform into entities that infringe upon personal liberties and autonomy. This incident forced me to confront what property ownership truly entails. Owning a piece of land is often seen as a cornerstone of personal freedom, It signifies control over one's environment. However, when external entities like HOAs impose strict regulations on property use, residents can find their rights eroded without their consent. In my case, the initial violation, the unapproved parking of an HOA member's car, was emblematic of a broader trend where authority figures assume entitlement over private property, straying dangerously close to authoritarianism. As I engaged in conversations with neighbors who resonated with my struggle, it became clear that many shared similar experiences of feeling powerless against the whims of an HOA. Some recounted instances where they felt coerced into compliance with regulations that did not align with their lifestyle choices or personal sentiments about land use. This raised questions about how much power homeowners truly have when they agree to be governed by such associations. Are we relinquishing our rights at the signing of a contract, or are we entering into a social agreement that allows for mutual respect and understanding among neighbors? The implications reach far beyond the immediate context of any single incident. When residents feel oppressed by the very organizations meant to foster community spirit, it can create divisions that fracture relationships and undermine neighborhood cohesion. As I pondered this reality, I realized my actions had inadvertently sparked something bigger, a dialogue among those affected by overreaching governance from HOAs. Together, we began to explore alternative solutions, advocating for amendments to HOA regulations that respect individual autonomy, pushing for transparency in decision-making processes, and even organizing community meetings to discuss our rights as homeowners. The confrontation also illuminated the varying perspectives on property rights. While some argue that strict regulations preserve neighborhood aesthetics and values, others see them as barriers to individual expression and freedom. This dichotomy creates an ongoing tension within communities, and as I processed my situation, I recognized that standing up for one's rights can sometimes necessitate drastic actions. Actions that may not always be socially acceptable but are born out of sheer desperation for change. Ultimately, my experience served as a potent reminder that property rights are complex and multifaceted. They require not just legal understanding but also active engagement within the community. Each homeowner must navigate these waters carefully, recognizing both their responsibilities and their rights. As debates around authority and autonomy continue to unfold, it's vital that we engage in constructive discourse around these issues, embracing both individual expression and collective responsibility, and work toward creating communities where everyone feels heard and respected. Reflecting on the tumultuous events that unfolded from my decision to bury the HOA member's car, I realized that this confrontation served as both a catalyst for personal growth and a profound lesson in the complexities of property rights and governance. The journey began with frustration over my boundaries being violated, leading to an impulsive act that shocked not only me but also my neighbors and the HOA. What initially felt like a simple assertion of control quickly spiraled into a multifaceted narrative involving community dynamics, legal repercussions, and personal introspection. In examining the broader implications of my actions, it became clear that conflicts with homeowners associations are not just battles between individuals and governing bodies. They represent deep-seated struggles over autonomy and respect. Many homeowners silently endure similar frustrations, feeling as though they have surrendered their freedoms in exchange for community standards. My experience illuminated the importance of standing up for one's rights. While actions may seem drastic, they often stem from a place of desperation among those who feel unheard or powerless. Additionally, the aftermath of my actions reinforced the value of open communication within communities. The conversations sparked by this incident revealed shared experiences and frustrations among neighbors, many of whom expressed a desire for more transparent governance structures within the HOA. This collective awakening can lead to constructive change, fostering an environment where everyone feels empowered to voice their concerns without fear of reprisal. As we began discussing potential reforms to HOA regulations, it became evident that these dialogues were essential for rebuilding trust and ensuring that all residents felt respected and valued. However, the situation also highlighted the risks inherent in taking a stand against authority. The looming threat of legal action reminded me that assertiveness must be balanced with caution. Through this experience, I learned that while direct action can be necessary, it should ultimately pave the way for constructive engagement rather than further division. Moving forward, I am committed to advocating for change through dialogue and collaboration rather than impulsive actions. Ultimately, this confrontation taught me invaluable lessons about conflict resolution. It encouraged me to approach disagreements with a mindset geared toward understanding rather than confrontation. Engaging with HOA members and fellow residents from a place of empathy will be crucial in addressing grievances effectively. By fostering mutual respect and exploring common ground, we can shift the narrative surrounding property rights and governance, creating communities that celebrate both individuality and collective responsibility. As I move on from this chapter, I carry with me a renewed sense of purpose, to champion individual freedoms while respecting communal standards. Each homeowner's voice contributes to the tapestry of our neighborhoods. It is imperative that we advocate not just for ourselves, but for equitable treatment for all members of our community. Through thoughtful engagement and collective action, we can build an environment where every resident feels empowered to assert their rights without resorting to drastic measures.